Welcome, Red Knight.
Good day, and good day, guys. Today we will start off with our Lovecraft tale. After just a couple pieces of business here, we do need to get to a couple things at some point, so we might as well get to them now on stream when it's best time to focus. I was looking at them a bit last night, but it seems the best time here to do it is live when we have full focus and attention as we start off our main show. Good to see you, though. We're gonna have a good time of it tonight. A lovely time there last night, mostly some good hunts, a little bit of Diablo 3, hardcore action, and we're going to take a look right now what I am discussing for looking at. So first thing here, we got to change our donation goal, which is no longer for Father's Day, so let's hide that for now, I guess. We don't need it there too bad. So we'll get to something later, but for now, let us take a look. We have some highlighting to do from those good rounds of hunt. No reason for highlights for Diablo 3. I feel like the whole thing is a highlight, basically. It's a fun time. But we have here Commander Root to remove follower list, as you see on April 6th with the follower raid from friend Coffee there before she subbed. We did get 870 follows simultaneously, basically. So these seem a little tricky to remove that. I tried to watch some tutorials and other such, but there's no way to restore a follow, even for Twitch. Only the user itself can refollow, if you then also block. So we have to be very careful here. We don't remove all our followers. We're playing with a dangerous tool here. We will get to our Lovecraft tale here very shortly. It will be the dreams from the witch house. Yeah, the dreams in the witch house right there from 1932. We will be reading that here very shortly. Gonna get to a little highlighting, let those frame drops smooth out, and hopefully figure out how to remove these specific followers from April 6th because trying to apply these filters with this username thing is tricky. So let's go back. It is to show April 6th. I believe this is the right date. Yeah, April 6th. If we do between April 6th and April 7th, we may lose a few human followers, but if we apply filters, will this now allow me to remove follower bot from April 6th? Let's give it a try, I guess. Apply filters, remove all followers listed below with those current filters. Apply filters. Currently have the 1400. Let's see if this works, shall we? I believe I've set it up right. Whoops, what happened there? It went from June 6th. No, we want April 6th. Good morning, Alucard. We're trying to figure out
Welcome, Red Knight.
a few of these things here, but we've almost got it. How are you doing there, Mr. Alucard?
Good greetings to Alucard Knight, Mr. Alucard Tardis, a longtime champion and supporter. Welcome back to the Roost, my friend. Great to see you, as always.
Thank you for starting off our chat.
I'm concerned I have thrown my lot in with a demented infant. You've got nothing but insults.
Lovely
have you?
human black
A tired
dragon.
little- Asian type. Yes, fuck you.
Very exciting. Yeah, not too bad, Alucard. We're trying to figure out how to remove these robot followers I got back in April. It's a couple months ago. I'm really trying to be careful about this because it could be disastrous. Alright, we got 1400 there. Let's see, April 6th. We go to April 7th. That should be fair. Apply filters. Alright, so as you see, I got 870 in one day there, Alucard. Let's see if this works, shall we? April 6th, April 7th, remove all followers listed below, and here goes nothing. Let's see. Remove followers and block them from just remove followers. I mean, I have the new bot here today, Sarai bot, so that'll help for further bot followers, so there's no reason to block anyone. Let's see if this works. Fingers crossed, Alucard. Let's hope it don't mess up our entire follower list of a whole year of streaming. And here we go. Okay, we're going for it, right? No. This will remove 867 followers. Yep, see, that was all from that follower bot. I have confirmed this is what I want. Yeah, that's all the robot followers. And now, we should be back. Did it work? Let's refresh. Follower known from bot accounts, remove. Yeah, let's try that. Confirm this is what I want, yes. Alright, now let's refresh. Yeah, I didn't see that one before. That's a helpful one there. It removes the ones that are known as bots. That'd be easier than doing it by the date. Huh. Alright, loading. We are back. 12:23. Okay, let's try to do this one now. I've confirmed this is what I want, yes. Maybe it takes a few minutes, I don't know. Alright, hopefully that'll work. I'll let it work here in the background. In the meantime, we do want to get some good hunt highlights yesterday, Alucard. We had some really nice rounds there. I was thinking we just highlight all kills for one big highlight reel. But, I know that might take a little while to find. Yep, already got some removed, so that's going great. We'll be finally under the 1K mark, since that is not true. We are more like 500, which we just celebrated, so that'll be much better. Alright, we got voice mod here for full activation anytime you guys would like some. Can add more voices whenever you'd like. Sorry, I won't do it hear myself till I get headphones in. That sounds terrible. We don't need that echo, definitely. Holy smokes. Alright, we'll be good. But for now, we have a few here, good fun ones, such as Radio Demon, Spellcaster, the Demon, Titan, Boomer, Chipmunk, Evil, Bowtie Billy. That's a good few to start with, I feel like. Is it an uneven amount, though, so I need to add one more? Yeah, let's add one more for now. Just while we're here. Yes, what you up to today? This fine Tuesday evening, New Zealand or such, Alucard? Is it Wednesday already? It's hard to keep track, I'm sorry. Good stuff here as we enjoy a good story soon to come. Get some good atmospheric fun. Other great times. Gonna ask a while ago, but I don't think you saw it. Would you like to be a mod on my show? Oh yeah, sure thing, Alucard. I think I saw you ask that. Yeah, anytime, Alucard. I've been a mod for a stream before, so I'm glad to do there when I'm able to pop in. Sure thing, Alucard. Got back from Club Clean. Tell me about that. Is that like a country club? What is that like? Interesting. Alright, we'll add another random one for now. We could add maybe robots. Yeah, we don't have the robot. Wait, there's no robot. Oh, you have to add it here. Yeah. There's also an android, but robot seems good. Alright, save there. Got it. Full voice box. Let's see if it refreshed right away for stream. Oh, it did. See, it added it instantaneously. We have robot, spellcaster, demon, ghost, alien, living dead, titan, poison, cathedral, possessed, radio demon, evil, boomer, bowtie Billy, chipmunk, and magic chords. All for use right away. Elsa, welcome back there, friend.
Welcome back.
You are joining us quite a bit frequently. I do appreciate it. My cleaners clean some clubs, so my nightclubs. Okay, that's your company, right? Alright.
Hello, Miss Elsa Inez, my
Got the
Targaryen compatriot
animated
all the way
emotes.
from Norway. Welcome back to the Roost. Great to see you.
Look at this, double champion already. We've got 1 month, we've got 3 month. Lovely stuff here, starting off our chant, double champions. I can highlight later sometime. It's a bit of an elaborate process, it's not too interesting. I was thinking of manually posting in the chat while I read that you guys are welcome to chat anytime, but that doesn't seem necessary, so when I come back to this highlighting here in a little bit, we want to get to the main content, main fun. Looks like the commander route is working, if it hasn't worked already. Let me, oh, it worked! Guys, we're officially back to 547 followers. Much more accurate depiction here. There might be a few robots still in there, but we removed all the ones that are identified as robots. I believe we did that setting, so... Guys, we are officially at 547 Dragon Knights. Now, properly, without the robot followers, so... We can adjust that follower goal as needed, but... Yeah, that's fine. Okay, we've officially cleared out them robots! Doesn't that feel great? Now we're back to our legitimate 547 followers for first year and such of streaming. It's great to see 2 champions in chat already. Elsa and Alucard, you guys are looking great. I was going to get some highlighting from those great hunts last night. I can do that either between streams tonight or as we get started here tonight. Whatever works. We'll get that frame drop looking good. But for now, because you have inspired me so much with Dragon Champion Elsa 1 month from Shipleb and 3 months with a Tier 2 badge from Alucard TARDIS, we are going to get straight to The Dreams in the Witch House by H.P. Lovecraft. A fun story from 1933. The Dreams in the Witch House. So let's get some good music accompaniment. Alucard, Elsa, we have a new cheer for our cheer of 11, which goes right hand in hand with our announcement for today's stream. For the Lovecraft story. Dead by Daylight, Call of Cthulhu, some good hunt today, maybe some more Diablo, whatever we can get time to. But it's fantastic to see both of your champions. How are you today, Elsa? Tell us all about the great fjords of Norway and the rest. Well, Alucard and his part of New Zealand. I guess you guys are closer together than I am to you, right? Technically. Geographically speaking. But still, you're a bit of a world away. It's great to come together here in the Dragon's Roost for a lovely time as we get started for our good reading and good fun and fantastic times. So, lovely to see you there, Alucard and Elsa. Thank you for beginning our chat, bringing it to life as we get to this Lovecraft story. Cheer of 11 if you'd like to hear that similar voice and see the Jolly Roger, but we have the command as well from that specific announcement added today. So a good bit of fun there. Elsa, Alucard, it is great to have you both champions here so far. We're going to get to some nice soundtracks here as we start our very long, potentially, I think around 3 hour stories, because The Colors Out of Space was about 3 hours long. I read that for quite a while. This one seems to be about similar length to that. But guys, we're officially here, back to 550 followers, 547 for our Bear Clan fun. Thank you for that. And we are going to get to some Lovecraft soundtracks as we begin the story. So we have a couple things here. We can start off with this one. Get to some other ones. Alrighty.
Are you a filmmaker or a content creator?
The benefits of not having YouTube Red. Yeah. Alright. We've got that one on deck for later. We've got this one shortly thereafter. And we've got this one to begin with. Starting from the top. Miss Elsa, Miss Alucard, you have inspired me to get to the highlighting for Hunt Fun later and get straight to the big long story, the main content tonight. You guys are welcome to chat anytime. Let's do it just this once here. I usually like to just participate directly in chat, so I won't have you guys chat amongst yourself without me. But I will post this here and there throughout the reading. A bit stressed again because I'm going to Sweden tomorrow, so I have to pack, finish 2 tasks I meant to do before leaving, and get through sleep. Understandable, Elsa. Glad you could join us for a good bit here along with Alucard for a fun time as we begin our good reading here with voice mod available anytime as well. Anytime you'd like. For our good reading today, we do have quite a few examples, quite a few things you can use, such as Radio Demon there. There's our soundtrack, looking fine. And let us begin. Please enjoy Elsa, Alucard, and all other friends as we begin for our 3-hour story. Probably get through most of it now and finish it here, coming back tonight. And we'll take in good procedure for good order of good events, activities, and games and adventures. So we will do it, we will enjoy it, and we'll figure out the best schedule for everything. Alrighty guys, plenty to do today, plenty to enjoy. It's nearly 1 o'clock. Let's get started. And here it is. The Dreams in the Witch House by H.P. Lovecraft. Please enjoy. Whether the dreams brought on the fever or the fever brought on the dreams, Walter Gilman did not know. Behind everything crouched the brooding, festering horror of the ancient town, and of the moldy, unhallowed garret gable where he wrote and studied and wrestled with figures and formulae when he was not tossing on the meager iron bed. His ears growing sensitive to a preternatural and intolerable degree, and he had long ago stopped the cheap mantel clock whose ticking had come to seem like a thunder of artillery. At night, the subtle stirring of the black city outside, the sinister scurrying of rats in the wormy partitions, and the creaking of hidden timbers in the centuried house were enough to give him a sense of strident pandemonium. The darkness always teemed with unexplained sound, and yet he sometimes shook with fear lest the noises he heard should subside and allow him to hear a certain other, fainter noises, which he suspected were lurking behind them. He was in the changeless, legend-haunted city of Arkham, with its clustering gambrel roofs that sway and sag over attics, where witches hid from the king's men in the dark, olden days of the province. Nor was any spot in that city more steeped in macabre memory than that gable room which harbored him, for it was this house and this room which had likewise harbored old Keziah Mason, whose flight from Salem Gaol at the last no one was ever able to explain. That was in 1692. The gaoler had gone mad and babbled of a small, white-fanged, furry thing which scuttled out of Keziah's cell, and not even Cotton Mather could explain the curves and angles smeared on the gray stone walls with some red, sticky fluid. Possibly Gilman ought not to have studied so hard. Non-Euclidean calculus and quantum physics are enough to stretch any brain, and when one mixes them with folklore and tries to trace a strange background of multi-dimensional reality behind the ghoulish hints of the Gothic tales and the wild whispers of the chimney corner, one can hardly expect to be wholly free from mental tension. Gilman came from Haverhill, but it was only after he had entered college in Arkham that he began to connect his mathematics with the fantastic legends of elder magic. Something in the air of the hoary town worked obscurely on his imagination. The professors at Miskatonic had urged him to slacken up and had voluntarily cut down his course at several points. Moreover, they had stopped him from consulting the dubious old books on forbidden secrets that were kept under lock and key in a vault at the university library. But all these precautions came late in the day, so that Gilman had some terrible hints from the dreaded Necronomicon of Abdul al-Hazred, the fragmentary book of Abon, and the suppressed Unausgesprochen Kulten of von Junst, to correlate with his abstract formulae on the properties of space and the linkage of dimensions known and unknown. He knew his room was in the old witch house. That, indeed, was why he had taken it. There was much in the Essex County records about Keziah Mason's trail, and what she had admitted under pressure to the court of Oyer and Terminer had fascinated Gilman beyond all reason. She had told Judge Hawthorne of lines and curves that could be made to point out directions leading through the walls of space of other spaces beyond, and had implied that such lines and curves were frequently used at certain midnight meetings in the dark alley of the white stone beyond Meadow Hill and on the unpeopled island in the river. She had spoken also of the Black Man, of her oath, and of her new secret name of Nahab. Then she had drawn these devices on the walls of her cell and vanished. Gilman believed strange things about Keziah, and had felt a queer thrill on learning that her dwelling was still standing after more than 235 years. It's great to have you start off there, Champions Alucard of the Tier Tube, and thanks to Shipleft Champion Elsa, longtime friend, starting up our chat today. Hope you guys are doing great, and hope you will enjoy.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
Stay a while and listen. Let's enjoy some great adventures today, and interesting stories as well. When he heard the hushed Arkham whispers about Keziah's persistent presence in the old house and the narrow streets, about the irregular human tooth marks left on certain sleepers in that and other houses, about the childish cries heard near May Eve, and Hallowmass, about the stench often noted in the old house's attic just after those dreaded seasons, and about the small, furry, sharp-toothed thing which haunted the moldering structure and the town, and nuzzled people curiously in the black hours before dawn. He resolved to live in the place at any cost. A room was easy to secure, for the house was unpopular, hard to rent, and long given over to cheap lodgings. Gilman could not have told what he expected to find there, but he knew he wanted to be in the building where some circumstance had more or less suddenly given a mediocre old woman of the 17th century an insight into mathematical depths, perhaps beyond the utmost modern delvings of Planck, Heisenberg, Einstein, and De Sitter. He studied the timber and plaster walls for traces of cryptic designs at every accessible spot where the paper had peeled, and within a week managed to get the eastern attic room where Keziah was held to have practiced her spells. It had been vacant from the first, for no one had ever been willing to stay there long, but the Polish landlord had grown wary about renting it. Yet nothing would ever happen to Gilman till about the time of the fever. No ghostly Keziah fitted through the somber halls and chambers. No small furry thing crept into his dismal eyrie to nuzzle him, and no record of the witch's incantations rewarded his constant search. Sometimes he would take walks through shadowy tangles of unpaved, musty-smelling lanes, where eldritch brown houses of unknown age leaned and tottered and leered mockingly through narrow, small-paned windows. Here he knew strange things had happened once, and there was a faint suggestion behind the surface that everything of that monstrous past might not, at least in the darkest, narrowest, and most intricately crooked alleys, have utterly perished. He also rowed out twice to the ill-regard island in the river, and made a sketch of the singular angles described by the moss-grown rows of gray standing stones, whose origin was so obscure and immemorial. Gilman's room was of a good size, but queerly irregular shape, the north wall slanting perceptibly inward from the outer to the inner end, while the low ceiling slanted gently downward in the same direction. Aside from an obvious rat hole and the signs of other stopped-up ones, there was no access, nor any appearance of a former avenue of access. To the space which must have existed between the slanting wall and the straight outer wall on the house's north side, through a view from the exterior shewed where a window had been boarded up at a very remote date. The loft above the ceiling, which must have had a slanting floor, was likewise inaccessible. When Gilman climbed up the ladder to the cobwebbed level loft above the rest of the attic, he found vestiges of a bygone aperture tightly and heavily covered with ancient planking, and secured by the stout wooden pegs common in colonial carpentry. No amount of persuasion, however, could induce the stolid landlord to let him investigate either of these two closed spaces. If you guys will let me know the music accompaniment is okay, decent audio balance, I would appreciate it. As time wore along, his absorption in the irregular wall of ceiling of his room increased, for he began to read into the odd angles a mathematical significance which seemed to offer vague clues regarding their purpose. Old Keziah, he reflected, might have had excellent reasons for living in a room with peculiar angles, for was it not through certain angles that she claimed to have gone outside the boundaries of the world of space we know? His interest gradually veered away from the unplumbed voids beyond the slanting surfaces, since it now appeared that the purpose of those surfaces concerned the side he was already on. The touch of the brain fever and the dreams began early in February. For some time, apparently, the curious angles of Gilman's room had been having a strange, almost hypnotic effect on him, and as the bleak winter advanced, he had found himself staring more and more intently at the corner where the down-slanting ceiling met the inward slanting wall. See, that's why I named it Trance Tuesday. We knew we were going to have some trances like this. About this period, his inability to concentrate on his formal studies worried him considerably, his apprehensions about the mid-year examinations being very acute. But the exaggerated sense of hearing was scarcely less annoying. Life had become an insistent and almost unendurable cacophony, and there was that constant, terrifying impression of other sounds, perhaps from regions beyond life, trembling on the very brink of audibility. So far as concrete noises went, the rats in the ancient partitions were the worst. Sometimes their scratching seemed not only furtive, but deliberate. When it came from beyond the slanting north wall, it was mixed with a sort of dry rattling, and when it came from the century-closed loft above the slanting ceiling, Gilman always braced himself as if expecting some horror which only bided its time before descending to engulf him utterly. The dreams were wholly beyond the pale of sanity, and Gilman felt that they must be a result jointly of his studies. In mathematics and in folklore. He had been thinking too much about the vague regions which his formulae told him must lie beyond the 3 dimensions we know, and about the possibility that old Keziah Mason, guided by some influence past all conjecture, had actually found the gate to those regions. The yellowed county records containing her testimony and that of her accusers were so damnably suggestive of these things beyond human experience, and the descriptions of the daring little furry object which served as her familiar were so painfully realistic despite their incredible details. That object, no larger than a good-sized rat and quaintly called by the townspeople Brown Jinkin, seemed to have been the fruit of a remarkable case of sympathetic herd delusion. For in 1692, no less than 11 persons had testified to glimpsing it. There were recent rumors, too, with a baffling and disconcerting amount of agreement. Witnesses said it had long hair and the shape of a rat, but that its sharp-toothed, bearded face was evilly human, while its paws were like tiny human hands. It took messages betwixt old Keziah and the devil, and was nursed on the witch's blood, which it sucked like a vampire. Its voice was a kind of loathsome titter, and it could speak all languages. Of all the bizarre monstrosities in Gilman's dreams, nothing filled him with greater panic and nausea than this blasphemous and diminutive hybrid, whose image flitted across his vision in a form 1,000-fold more hateful than anything his walking mind had deduced from the ancient records and the modern whispers. Gilman's dreams consisted largely in plunges through limitless abysses of inexplicably colored twilight and baffling disordered sound, abysses whose material and gravitational properties and whose relation to his own entity he could not even begin to explain. Alucard, I see you there. It's Elsa. Elsa, glad to hear you're studying and enjoying. Can you hear the music accompaniment? That's just the one thing I'm curious about. Is it a decent balance between my voice and the music in the background? I could put in my headphones also and have the audio capturing here directly, so it's not echo, dual, reverb, double echo audio, but it's at least the one track and then my mic separately. So if you want headphones and you can hear it more clearly like this, just let me know and I'll turn up the music a little bit there. Otherwise, we'll keep it just one-to-one mic and the one place coming through speakers if it's a decent balance, because I do like to have them both decent balance and, of course, not overpower my voice, but still have a nice accompaniment to the music. And this is a long story, so it's good to establish these things early. But thank you, Elsa. If you can offer any opinion there. That was more hateful. His waking mind had deducted from the ancient records and the modern whispers. We left off there, right? Yeah. His image flitted across his vision in a form 1,000-fold more hateful than anything in his waking mind and deduced from the ancient records from the modern whispers. Alright, we'll pick it up from there. Is it decent balance audio? I think it's good. I didn't think about it before you mentioned it, though. Alright, as long as you can hear it, I mean. Alright, thank you. As long as you can hear it a little bit. Music accompaniment. Otherwise, we'll just put in the headphones, but I like to see the headphones for our main adventures because it makes more sense to have it then. And this is just more of an open reading and less deafening of my own voice, so that's great. Thank you, Elsa. Appreciate it. Gilman's dreams consisted largely in plunges through limitless abysses of inexplicably colored twilight and baffling, disordered sound. Abysses whose material and gravitational properties and whose relation to his own entity he could not even begin to explain. Alucard, great to see you still with us as well. All good, man. Just making sure everything's fine.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
Great to have you both with us, champions. Love the orange and red champion. You guys are looking great. Thank you very much. Love to have you. Love you, friends. Love you guys. He did not walk or climb, fly or swim, crawl or wriggle, yet always experienced a mode of motion partly voluntary and partly involuntary. Of his own condition he could not well judge, for sight of his arms, legs, and torso seemed always cut off by some odd disarrangement of perspective. But he felt that his physical organization and faculties were somehow marvelously transmuted and obliquely projected, though not which a certain grotesque relationship to his normal proportions and properties. The abysses were by no means vacant, being crowded with indescribably angled masses of alien-hued substance, some of which appeared to be organic while others seemed inorganic. A few of the organic objects tended to awake vague memories in the back of his mind, though he could form no conscious idea of what they mockingly resembled or suggested. In the later dreams, he began to distinguish separate categories into which the organic objects appeared to be divided, and which seemed to involve, in each case, a radically different species of conduct pattern and basic motivation. Of these categories, one seemed to him to include objects slightly less illogical and irrelevant in their motions than the members of the other categories. All the objects, organic and inorganic alike, were totally beyond description or even comprehension. Gilman sometimes compared the inorganic masses to prisms, labyrinths, clusters of cubes and planes, and cyclopean buildings, and the organic things struck him variously as groups of bubbles, octopi, centipedes, living Hindu idols, and intricate arabesques roused into a kind of Orphidian animation. Everything he saw was unspeakably menacing and horrible, and whenever one of the organic entities appeared by its motions to be noticing him, he felt a stark, hideous fright which generally jolted him awake. Of how the organic entities moved, he could tell no more than of how he moved himself. In time, he observed a further mystery, the tendency of certain entities to appear suddenly out of empty space, or to disappear totally with equal suddenness. The shrieking, roaring confusion of sound which permeated the abysses was past all analysis as to pitch, timbre, or rhythm, but seemed to be synchronous with vague visual changes in all the indefinite objects, organic and inorganic alike. Gilman had a constant sense of dread that it might rise to some unbearable degree of intensity during one or another of its obscure, relentless, inevitable fluctuations. But it was not in these vortices of complete alienage that he saw Brown Jenkin. That shocking little horror was reserved for certain lighter, sharper dreams which assailed him just before he dropped into the fullest depths of sleep. He would be lying in the dark, fighting to keep awake, when a faint, lambent glow would seem to shimmer around the centuried room, showing in a violent mist the convergence of angled planes which had seized his brain so insidiously. The horror would appear to pop out of the rat hole in the corner and patter toward him over the sagging, wide-planked floor with evil expectancy in its tiny, bearded human face. But mercifully, this dream always melted away before the object got close enough to nuzzle him. It had hellishly long, sharp canine teeth. Gilman tried to stop up the rat hole every day, but each night the real tenants of the partitions would gnaw away the obstruction. Whatever it might be, once he had the landlord nail tin over it, but the next night the rats gnawed a fresh hole, in making which they pushed or dragged out into the room a curious little fragment of bone. Gilman did not report his fever to the doctor, for he knew he could not pass the examinations if ordered to the college infirmary, when every moment was needed for cramming. As it was, he failed in Calculus D and Advanced General Psychology, though not without hope of making up lost ground before the end of the term. It was in March when the fresh element entered his lighter preliminary dreaming, and the nightmare shape of Brown Jenkin began to be companioned by the nebulous blur which grew more and more to resemble a bent old woman. The addition disturbed him more than he could account for, but finally he decided that it was like an ancient crone whom he had twice actually encountered in the dark tangle of lanes near the abandoned wharves. On those occasions the evil, sardonic, and seemingly unmotivated stare of the beldame had set him almost shivering, especially the first time, and when an overgrown rat darting across the shadowed mouth of a neighboring alley had made him think irrationally of Brown Jenkin. Now, he reflected, those nervous fears were being mirrored in his disordered dreams. That the influence of the old house was unwholesome, he could not deny, but traces of his early morbid interest still held him there. He argued that the fever alone was responsible for his nightly fantasies, and that when the touch abated he would be free from the monstrous visions. Those visions, however, were of abhorrent vividness and convincingness, and whenever he awakened he retained a vague sense of having undergone much more than he remembered. He was hideously sure that in unrecalled dreams he had talked with both Brown Jenkin and the old woman, and that they had been urging him to go somewhere with them to meet a third being of greater potency. Toward the end of March, he began to pick up in his mathematics, though other studies bothered him increasingly. He was getting an intuitive knack for solving Riemannian equations, and astonished Professor Upham by his comprehension of fourth-dimensional and other problems which had floored all the rest of the class. One afternoon, there was a discussion of possible freakish curvatures in space, and of theoretical points of approach or even a contact between our part of the cosmos and various other regions as distant as the farthest stars or the transgalactic gulfs themselves, or even as fabulously remote as the tentatively conceivable cosmic units beyond the whole Einsteinian space-time continuum. Gilman's handling of this theme filled everyone with admiration, even though some of his hypothetical illustrations caused an increase in the always plentiful gossip about his nervous and solitary eccentricity. What made the students shake their heads was his sober theory that a man might, given mathematical knowledge, admittedly beyond all likelihood of human acquirement, step deliberately from the earth to any other celestial body, which might lie at one of an infinity of specific points in the cosmic pattern. Such a step, he said, would require only 2 stages. First, a passage out of the 3-dimensional sphere we know, and second, a passage back to the 3-dimensional sphere at another point, perhaps one of infinite remoteness. That this could be accomplished without loss of life was in many cases conceivable. Any being from any part of 3-dimensional space could probably survive in the 4th dimension, and its survival of the 2nd stage would depend upon what alien part of 3-dimensional space it might select for its re-entry. Denizens of some planets might be able to live on certain others, even planets belonging to other galaxies, or to similar dimensional phases of other space-time continua. Though, of course, there must be vast numbers of mutually uninhabitable, even though mathematically juxtaposed bodies of zones of space. It was also possible that the inhabitants of a given dimensional realm could survive entry to many unknown and incomprehensible realms of additional or indefinitely multiplied dimensions, be they within or outside the given space-time continuum, and that the converse would be likewise true. This was a matter for speculation, though one could be fairly certain that the type of mutation involved in a passage from any given dimensional plane to the next higher plane would not be destructive of biological integrity as we understand it. Gilman could not be very clear about his reasons for his last assumption, but his haziness here was more than overbalanced by his clearness on other complex points. Professor Upham especially liked his demonstration of the kinship of higher mathematics to certain phases of magical lore transmitted down the ages from an ineffable antiquity, human or pre-human, whose knowledge of the cosmos and its laws was greater than ours. Around the 1st of April, Gilman worried considerably because his slow fever did not abate. He was also troubled by what some of his fellow lodgers said about his sleepwalking. It seemed that he was often absent from his bed, and that the creaking of his floor at certain hours of the night was remarked by the man in the room below. This fellow also spoke of hearing the tread of shod feet in the night, but Gilman was sure he must have been mistaken in this, since shoes as well as other apparel were always precisely in place in the morning. One could develop all sorts of aural delusions in the morbid old house, for did not Gilman himself, even in daylight, now feel certain that noises other than rat scratchings came from the black voids beyond the slanting wall and above the slanting ceiling? His pathologically sensitive ears began to listen for faint footfalls in the immemorially sealed loft overhead. And sometimes the illusions of such things was agonizingly realistic. However, he knew that he had actually become a somnambulist. For twice at night his room had been found vacant, though with all his clothing in place. Of this he had been assured by Frank Elwood, the one fellow student whose poverty forced him to room in this squalid and unpopular house. Elwood had been studying in the small hours and had come up for help on a differential equation, only to find Gilman absent. It had been rather presumptuous of him to open the unlocked door after knocking had failed to rouse a response, but he had needed the help very badly, and thought that his host would not mind a gentle prodding awake. On neither occasion, though, had Gilman been there, and when told of the matter he wondered where he could have been wandering, barefoot, and with only his nightclothes on. He resolved to investigate the matter, if reports of his sleepwalking continued, and thought of sprinkling flour on the floor of the corridor to see where his footsteps might lead. The door was the only conceivable egress, for there was no possible foothold outside the narrow window. As April advanced, Gilman's fever-sharpened ears were disturbed by the whining prayers of a superstitious loom-fixer named Joe Mazurowicz, who had a room on the ground floor. Mazurowicz had told long, rambling stories about the ghost of old Keziah and the furry, sharp-fanged, nuzzling thing, and had said he was so badly haunted at times that only his silver crucifix, given him for the purpose by Father Iwanicki of St. Stanislaus Church, could bring him relief. Now he was praying because the witch's Sabbath was drawing near. May Eve was Walpurgis night, when hell's blackest evil roamed, and earth and all the slaves of Satan gathered for nameless rites and deeds. It was always a very bad time in Arkham, even though the fine folks up in Miskatonic Avenue and High and Saltonstall streets pretended to know nothing about it. There would be bad doings, and a child or two would probably be missing. Joe knew about such things, for his grandmother in the old country had heard tales from her grandmother. It was wise to pray and count one's heads at this season. For 3 months, Keziah and Brown Jenkin had not been near Joe's room, nor near Paul Choinsky's room, nor anywhere else, and it meant no good when they held off like that. They must be up to something. Gilman dropped in at a doctor's office on the 16th of the month, and was surprised to find his temperature was not as high as he had feared. The physician questioned him sharply and advised him to see a nerve specialist. On reflection, he was glad he had not consulted the still more inquisitive college doctor. Old Waldron, who had curtailed his activities before, would have made him take a rest, an impossible thing now, that he was so close to great results in his equations. He was certainly near the boundary between the known universe and the fourth dimension, and who could say how much farther he might go? Oh boy. But even as these thoughts came to him, he wondered at the source of his strange confidence. Did all of this perilous sense of imminence come from the formulae on the sheets he covered day by day? The soft, stealthy, imaginary footsteps in the sealed loft above were unnerving. And now, too, there was a growing feeling that somebody was constantly persuading him to do something terrible which he could not do. How about the somnambulism? Where did he go sometimes in the night? And what was the faint suggestion of sound which once in a while seemed to trickle through the maddening confusion of identifiable sounds even in broad daylight and full wakefulness? Its rhythm did not correspond to anything on earth, unless perhaps to the cadence of one of two unmentionable Sabbath chants, and sometimes he feared it corresponded to certain attributes of the vague shrieking or roaring in those wholly alien abysses of dream. The dreams were meanwhile getting to be atrocious. In the lighter preliminary phase, the evil old woman was now a fiendish distinctness, and Gilman knew she saw the one who had frightened him in the slums. Her bent back, long nose, and shriveled chin were unmistakable, and her shapeless brown garments were like those he remembered. The expression on her face was one of hideous malevolence and exultation, and when he awakened, he could recall a croaking voice that persuaded and threatened. He must meet the Black Man, and go with them all to the throne of Azathoth, and at the center of ultimate chaos. That was what she said. He must sign in his own blood the Book of Azathoth, and take a new secret name now that his independent delvings had gone so far. What kept him from going with her and Brown Jenkin and the other to the throne of chaos were the thin flutes pipe mindlessly was the fact that he had seen the name Azathoth in the Necronomicon, and knew it stood for a primal evil too horrible for description. The old woman always appeared out of thin air near the corner where the downward slant met the inward slant. She seemed to crystallize at a point closer to the ceiling than to the floor, and every night she was a little nearer and more distinct before the dream shifted. Brown Jenkin, too, was always a little nearer at the last, and its yellowish-white fangs glistened shockingly in that unearthly violet phosphorescence. Its shrill, loathsome tittering stuck more and more in Gilman's head, and he could remember in the morning how it had produced the words Azathoth and Nyarlathotep. In the deeper dreams, everything was likewise more distinct, and Gilman felt that the twilight abysses around him were those of the fourth dimension. Those organic entities whose motions seemed least flagrantly irrelevant and unmotivated were probably projections of life forms from our own planet, including human beings. What the others were in their own dimensional sphere or spheres he had dared not try to think. Two of the less irrelevantly moving things, a rather large congeries of iridescent prolately spheroidal bubbles, and a very much smaller polyhedron of unknown colors and rapidly shifting surface angles, seemed to take notice of him and follow him about or float ahead as he changed position among the Titan prisms, labyrinths, cube and plane clusters, and quasi-buildings. And all the while the vague shrieking and roaring waxed louder and louder, as if approaching some monstrous climax of utterly unendurable intensity. During the night of April 19th to 20, the new development occurred. Gilman was half involuntarily moving about in the twilight abysses with the bubble mass and the small polyhedron floating ahead, when he noticed the peculiarly regular angles formed by the edges of some gigantic neighboring prism clusters. In another second, he was out of the abyss and standing tremendously on a rocky hillside bathed in intense, diffused green light. He was barefooted and in his night clothes, and when he tried to walk, discovered that he could scarcely lift his feet. A swirling vapor hid everything but the immediate sloping terrain from sight, and he shrank from the thought of the sounds that might surge out of that vapor. Then he saw the two shapes laboriously crawling toward him. The old woman and the little furry thing. The crone strained up to her knees and managed to cross her arms in a singular fashion, while Brown Jenkin pointed in a certain direction with a horribly anthropod forepaw which it raised with evident difficulty. Spurred by an impulse he did not originate, Gilman dragged himself forward along a course determined by the angle of the old woman's arms and the direction of the small monstrosity's paw, and before he had shuffled 3 steps he was back in the twilight abysses. Geometrical shapes seethed around him, and he fell dizzily and interminably. At last he awoke in his bed in the crazily angled garret of the eldritch old house. He was good for nothing that morning, and stayed away from all his classes. Some unknown attraction was pulling his eyes in a seemingly irrelevant direction, for he could not help staring at a certain vacant spot on the floor. As the day advanced, the focus of his unseeing eyes changed position, and by noon he had conquered the impulse to stare at vacancy. About 2 o'clock he went out for lunch, and as he threaded the narrow lanes of the city he found himself turning always to the southeast. Only an effort halted him at a cafeteria in Church Street, and after the meal he felt the unknown pull still more strongly. He would have to consult a nerve specialist after all. Perhaps there was a connection with his somnambulism. But meanwhile he might at least try to break the morbid spell himself. Undoubtedly he could still manage to walk away from the pull, so with a great resolution he headed against it and dragged himself deliberately north along Garrison Street. By the time he had reached the bridge over the Miskatonic, he was in a cold perspiration, and he clutched at the iron railing as he gazed upstream at the ill-regarded island whose regular lines of ancient standing stones brooded sullenly in the afternoon sunlight. Then he gave a start, for there was a cleverly visible living figure on that desolate island, and a second glance told him it was certainly the strange old woman whose sinister aspect had worked itself so disastrously into his dreams. The tall grass near her was moving, too, as if some other living thing were crawling close to the ground. When the old woman began to turn toward him, he fled precipitately off the bridge and into the shoulder of the town's labyrinthine waterfront alleys. Distant though the island was, he felt that a monstrous and invincible evil could flow from the sardonic stare of that bent, ancient figure in brown. The southeastward pull still held, and only with a tremendous resolution could Gilman drag himself into the old house and up the rickety stairs. For hours he sat silent and aimless, with his eyes shifting gradually westward. About 6 o'clock, his sharpened ears caught the whining prayers of Joe Mazurowicz 2 floors below, and in desperation he seized his hat and walked out into the sunset golden streets, letting the now directly southward pull carry him where it might. An hour later, darkness found him in the open fields beyond Hangman's Brook, with the glimmering spring stars shining ahead. The urge to walk was gradually changing to an urge to leap mystically into space, and suddenly he realized just where the source of the pull lay. It was in the sky. A definite point among the stars had a claim on him and was calling him. Apparently it was a point somewhere between Hydra and Argo Navis, and he knew that he had been urged forward toward it ever since he had awakened soon after dawn. In the morning it had been underfoot. Afternoon found it rising in the southeast, and now it was roughly south but wheeling toward the west. What was the meaning of this new thing? Was he going mad? How long would it last? Again, mustering his resolution, Gilman turned and dragged himself back to the sinister old house. Mazurowicz was waiting for him at the door, and seemed both anxious and reluctant to whisper some fresh bit of superstition. It was about the witch light. Joe had been out celebrating the night before, It was Patriots' Day in Massachusetts, and had come home after midnight. Looking up at the house from outside, he had thought at first that Gilman's window was dark, but then he had seen the faint violet glow within. He wanted to warn the gentleman about that glow, for everybody in Arkham knew it was Keziah's witchlight, which played near Brown Jenkin and the ghost of the old crone herself. He had not mentioned this before, but now he must tell about it because it meant that Keziah and her long-toothed familiar were haunting the young gentleman. Sometimes he and Paul Choinsky and landlord Dombrowski thought they saw the light seeping out of cracks in the sealed loft above the young gentleman's room. But they had all agreed not to talk about that. However, it would be better for the gentleman to take another room and to get a crucifix from some good priest like Father Iwaniki. As the man rambled on, Gilman felt a nameless panic clutch at his throat. He knew that Joe must have been half drunk when he came home the night before. Yet this mention of a violet light in the garret window was of frightful import. It was a lambent glow of this sort which always played about the old woman, and the small furry thing in those lighter, sharper dreams which prefaced his plunge into unknown abysses. And the thought that a wakeful second person could see the dream luminance was utterly beyond sane harborage. Yet where had the fellow got such an odd notion? Had he himself talked as well as walked around the house in his sleep? No, Joe said. He had not, but he must check up on this. Perhaps Frank Elwood could tell him something, though he hated to ask. Let me see here. He must check up on this. Perhaps Frank Elwood could tell him something, though he hated to ask. Let me see here. All right. Fever, wild dreams, somnambulism, illusions of sound, a pull toward a point in the sky, and now a suspicion of insane sleep-talking. He must stop studying, see a nerve specialist, and take himself in hand. When he climbed to the second story, he paused at Elwood's door, but saw that the other youth was out. Reluctantly, he continued up to his garret room and sat down in the dark. His gaze was still pulled to the southwest, but he also found himself listening intently for some sound in the closed loft above, and half imagining that an evil violet light seeped down through an infinitesimal crack in the low, slanting ceiling. That night, as Gilman slept, the violet light broke upon him with heightened intensity, and the old witch and small furry thing, getting closer than ever before, mocked him with inhuman squeals and devilish gestures. He was glad to sink into the vaguely roaring twilight abysses, though the pursuit of that iridescent bubble congeries and that kaleidoscopic little polyhedron was menacing and irritating. Then came the shift as a vast converging plains of a slippery-looking substance loomed above and below him. A shift which ended in a flash of delirium and a blaze of unknown alien light, in which yellow, carmine, and indigo were madly and inextricably blended. He was half lying on a high, fantastically balustraded terrace above a boundless jungle of outlandish, incredible peaks, balanced plains, domes, minarets, horizontal discs poised on pinnacles, and numberless forms of still greater wildness, some of stone and some of metal, which glittered gorgeously in the mixed, almost blistering glare from a polychromatic sky. Looking upward, he saw 3 stupendous discs of flame, each of a different hue, and at a different height above an infinitely distant curving horizon of low mountains. Behind him, tiers of higher terraces toward aloft as far as he could see. The city below stretched away to the limits of vision, and he hoped that no sound would well up from it. The pavement from which he easily raised himself was of a veined, polished stone beyond his power to identify. And the tiles were cut in bizarre angled shapes, which struck him as less asymmetrical than based on some unearthly symmetry whose laws he could not comprehend. The balustrade was chest high, delicate, and fantastically wrought, while along the rail were ranged at short intervals little figures of grotesque design and exquisite workmanship. They, like the whole balustrade, seemed to be made of some sort of shining metal whose color could not be guessed in this chaos of mixed effulgences, and their nature utterly defied conjecture. They represented some ridged barrel-shaped object with thin horizontal arms radiating spoke-like from a central ring, and with vertical knobs or bulbs projecting from the head and base of the barrel. Each of these knobs was the hub of a system of 5 long, flat, triangularly tapering arms arranged around it like the arms of a starfish, nearly horizontal, but curving slightly away from the central barrel. The base of the bottom knob was fused to the long railing with so delicate a point of contact that several figures had been broken off and were missing. The figures were about 4.5 inches in height, while the spiky arms gave them a maximum diameter of about 2.5 inches. When Gilman stood up, the tiles felt hot to his bare feet. He was wholly alone, and his first act was to walk to the balustrade and look dizzily down at the endless cyclopean city almost 2,000 feet below. As he listened, he thought a rhythmic confusion of faint musical pipings covering denizens of the place.
The sight turned him giddy after a while, so that he would have fallen to the pavement had he not clutched instinctively at the lustrous balustrade.
His right hand fell on one of the projecting figures, the touch seeming to steady him slightly. It was too much, however, for the exotic delicacy of the metal work, and the spiky figure snapped off under his grasp. Still half dazed, he continued to clutch it as his other hand seized a vacant space on the smooth railing. But now his oversensitive ears caught something behind him, and he looked back across the level terrace. Approaching him softly, though without apparent furtiveness, were 5 figures, 2 of which were the sinister old woman and the fanged, furry little animal. The other 3 were what sent him unconscious, for they were living entities about 8 feet high, shaped precisely like the spiky images on the balustrade, and propelling themselves by a spider-like wriggling of their lower set of starfish arms. Gilman awakened in his bed, drenched by a cold perspiration and with a smarting sensation in his face, hands, and feet. Springing to the floor, he washed and dressed in frantic haste, as if it were necessary for him to get out of the house as quickly as possible. He did not know where he wished to go, but felt that once more he would have to sacrifice his classes. The odd pull toward that spot in the sky between Hydra and Argo had abated, but another of even greater strength had taken its place. Now he felt that he must go north, infinite north. He dreaded to cross the bridge that gave a view of the desolate island in the Miskatonic, so went over the Peabody Avenue Bridge. Very often he stumbled, for his eyes and ears were chained to an extremely lofty point in the blank blue sky. After about an hour, he got himself under better control, and saw that he was far from the city. All around him stretched the bleak emptiness of salt marshes, while the narrow road ahead led to Innsmouth, that ancient, half-deserted town which Arkham people were so curiously unwilling to visit. Though the northward pull had not diminished, he resisted it as he had resisted the other pull, and finally found that he could almost balance the one against the other. Plodding back to town and getting some coffee at a soda fountain, he dragged himself in the public library and browsed aimlessly among the lighter magazines. Once he met some friends who remarked how oddly sunburned he looked, but he did not tell them of his walk. At 3 o'clock, he took some lunch at a restaurant, noting meanwhile that the pull had either lessened or divided itself. After that, he killed the time at a cheap cinema show, seeing the inane performance over and over again without paying any attention to it. About 9 at night, he drifted homeward and stumbled into the ancient house. Joe, let me see here. About 9 at night, he drifted homeward and stumbled into the ancient house. Joe Mazurwich was whining unintelligible prayers, and Gilman hastened up to his own garret chamber without pausing to see if Elwood was in. It was when he turned on the feeble electric light that the shock came. At once he saw there was something on the table which did not belong there. And a second look left no room for doubt. Lying on its side, for it could not stand up alone, was the exotic, spiky figure which in his monstrous dream he had broken off the fantastic balustrade. No detail was missing. The ridged, barrel-shaped center, the thin, radiating arms, the knobs at each end, and the flat, slightly outward-curving starfish arms spreading from those knobs. All were there. In the electric light, the color seemed to be a kind of iridescent gray veined with green, and Gilman could see amidst the horror and bewilderment that one of the knobs ended in a jagged break corresponding to its former point of attachment to the dream railing. Only his tendency toward a dazed stupor prevented him from screaming aloud. This fusion of dream and reality was too much to bear. Still dazed, he clutched at the spiky thing and staggered downstairs to landlord Dombrowski's quarters. The whining prayers of the superstitious loom-fixer were still sounding through the moldy halls, but Gilman did not mind them now. The landlord was in, and greeted him pleasantly. No, he had not seen that thing before, and did not know anything about it, but his wife had said she found a funny tin thing in one of the beds when she fixed the rooms at noon, and maybe that was it. Dombrowski called her, and she waddled in. Yes, that was the thing. She had found it in a young gentleman's bed on the side next to the wall. It had looked very queer to her, but of course the young gentleman had lots of queer things in his room. Books and curios and pictures and markings on paper. She certainly knew nothing about it. So Gilman climbed upstairs again in a mental turmoil, convinced that he was either still dreaming or that his somnambulism had run to incredible extremes and led him to the depredations in unknown places. Okay. To find where I was real quick. Known places. There we go. Where had he got this outre thing? He did not recall seeing it in any museum in Arkham. It must have been somewhere, though, and the sight of it as he snatched it in his sleep must have caused the odd dream picture of the balustrated terrace. Next day he would make some very guarded inquiries, and perhaps see the nerve specialist. Meanwhile, he would try to keep track of his somnambulism, and he went upstairs and across the garret hall. As he went upstairs and across the garret hall, he sprinkled about some flour which he had borrowed, with a frank admission as to its purpose from the landlord. He had stopped at Elwood's door on the way, but had found all dark within. Entering his room, he placed the spiky thing on the table and lay down in complete mental and physical exhaustion without pausing to undress. From the closed loft above the slanting ceiling, he thought he heard a faint scratching and patting, but he was too disorganized even to mind it. That cryptical pull from the north was getting very strong again, though it seemed now to come from a lower place in the sky. In the dazzling violet light of dream, the old woman and the fanged, furry thing came again with a greater distinctness than on any former occasion. This time they actually reached him, and he felt the crone's withered claws clutching at him. He was pulled out of bed and into empty space, and for a moment he heard a rhythmic roaring and saw that the twilight amorphousness of the vague abysses seething around him. But that moment was very brief, for presently he was in a crude, windowless little space with rough beams and planks rising to a peak just above his head, and with a curious slanting floor underfoot. Propped level on that floor were low cases full of books of every degree of antiquity and disintegration, and in the center were a table and bench, both apparently fastened in place. Small objects of unknown shape and nature were ranged on the tops of the cases, and in the flaming violet light Gilman thought he saw a counterpart of the spiky image which had puzzled him so horribly. On the left the floor fell abruptly away, leaving a black triangular gulf out of which, after a second's dry rattling, there presently climbed the hateful little furry thing with the yellow fangs and the bearded human face. The evilly grinning beldame still clutched him, and beyond the table stood a figure he had never seen before. A tall, lean man of dead black coloration, but without the slightest sign of negroid features, wholly devoid of either hair or beard, and wearing as his only garment a shapeless robe of some heavy black fabric. His feet were indistinguishable because of the table and bench, but he must have been shod, since there was a clicking whenever he changed position. The man did not speak, and bore no trace of expression on his small, regular features. He merely pointed to a book of prodigious size, which lay open on the table, while the beldame thrust a huge grey quill into Gilman's right hand. Over everything was a pall of intensely maddening fear, and the climax was reached when the furry thing ran up the dreamer's clothing to his shoulders and then down his left arm, finally biting him sharply in the wrist just below his cuff. As the blood spurted from this wound, Gilman lapsed into a faint. He awakened on the morning of the 22nd with a pain in his left wrist, and saw that his cuff was brown with dried blood. His recollections were very confused, but the scene was the black man and the unknown space stood out vividly. The rats must have bitten him as he slept, giving rise to the climax of that frightful dream. Opening the door, he saw that the floor of the corridor floor was undisturbed, except for the huge prints of the loutish fellow who roomed at the other end of the garret. So he had not been sleepwalking this time. Hey, Grim. Welcome in. You got it.
All the way from New Zealand. Welcome back.
You got it, Grim. Welcome back there. Champion Grim. Thanks to Ship Left. How are you doing, Grim? Joining out Brother Alucard here. Looking great. And joining us at a great time here for the Lovecraft tale. And for the very one of the first times ever doing another command here. One of our great commands. You have made it, Grim. Thank you for remembering that, my friend. Great to see you.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
Good to see you, Grim. How are you doing? How is everything? Good evening, good morning, and good day. We are in the middle here of the Dreams in the Witch House. A pretty interesting little story here. Let's see. So he had not been sleepwalking this time, but something would have to be done about those rats. He would speak to the landlord about them. Again, he tried to stop up the hole at the base of the slanting wall, wedging in a candlestick, which seemed of about the right size. His ears were ringing horribly, as if with the residual echoes of some horrible noise heard in dreams. We also have a new command there, Grim, for LOL, and a new cheer of 11 if you'd like to see the Jolly Rogers face again from our plug for the day. We'll do one more plug show for you because you made it. Join us here for some Dead by Daylight, Lovecraft, Call of Cthulhu, Hunt and Diablo, all planned for the night. Great to see you, Graham. We're doing all right. We're enjoying it. Interesting. Trying to find a good balance for this music as well. All right. His ears were ringing horribly as if with residual echoes of some horrible noise heard in dreams. As he bathed and changed clothes, he tried to recall what he had dreamed after the scene in the violet-lit space, but nothing definite would crystallize in his mind. That scene itself must have corresponded to the sealed loft overhead, which had begun to attack his imagination so violently, but left impressions were faint and hazy. We also have voice mod here. Grim.
Yes, sounds good indeed, my friend. Easy activation here for About Me section voice mod or top of chat with widgets. Anytime you'd like, Mr. Gaming Grim Reaper.
All right. There were suggestions of the vague twilight abysses and of still vaster, blacker abysses beyond them. abysses in which all fixed suggestions of form were absent. He had been taken there by the bubble conjuries and the little polyhedron which always dogged him. But they, like himself, had changed to wisps of milky, barely luminous mists in this farther void of ultimate blackness. Yep, anytime you'd like, Grim, we have quite the selection of voices. All of them are pretty fun. Something else had gone on ahead, a larger wisp which now and then condensed into nameless approximations of form, and he thought that their progress had been in a straight line, but rather along the alien curves and spirals of some ethereal vortex which obeyed laws unknown to the physics and mathematics of any conceivable cosmos. Yep, you could join there. Our leaderboard for the cheers. You do 50-bit cheer. You'd be number 5 if you cheer right now. And join that amazing cheer of the month for 10,000 dab, our highest cheer ever. Ship left with 1,000, Moog for 100. Shortly there. Follow us if you ever like to join them on the leaderboard for the rest of the month, Grim, before we set you back to all-time top cheers and gift subs, which we'll do at the start of the month of July. You are always more than welcome to spend your bits in the Dragon's Roost. As you see, we have unique cheers for 1 through 10 bits as well, 1 through 11 technically now, with a new Jolly Roger exclamation LOL sound. So you are always welcome there, Grim, but you know, of course, I do value most your time, your chat, your appreciation, and your passion as a Dragon Knight. That is always the greatest gift you can give me, is being here and staying a while to enjoy our fun times. Stay a while and listen. Indeed. It's your birthday on the 1st of July. Well, we'll look forward to that. 3 days before our Independence Day, let's have some fun celebrations or games together, Grim. We'll at least do some chat interactive games for you. Hand of Fate, Domina, or Vermintide if you'd like to, or Quiplash. We could do Quiplash too. Yeah, I would love to do some of that, Grim. Some fun time there. We didn't play Quiplash that last weekend. We didn't have enough, chats this weekend, but for it too. Dragon Knighting! Alright, Grim! It is time. For the very first Dragon Knighting, would you like a VIP badge or a mod badge? I'm happy to give you either. And let's get Gaming Grim Reaper's official Dragon Knighting as a true Dragon Champion Dragon Knight of the Roost. And here it is. Mr. Gaming Grim Reaper! You have been a fun chatter, a fun supporter, having joined your brother Alucard a few months into the Dragon's Roost. And now is the time to dub you, indeed, a true Knight of the Roost. Thank you, Gaming Grim Reaper. You are now officially inducted. It's been a while since we've had a knighting ceremony. Let's see if we remember how to do this. To be brave, to be loyal, to be faithful, to be courteous, to be charitable, to be honorable. I call upon you to maintain the good knight vows throughout Twitch, throughout all things in your life, to be a true Dragon Knight, upholding good positive morals and tasks throughout all your actions and everything you are able to do. VIP for you, Grim. You've got it. Welcome indeed, Gaming Grim Reaper, to the annals of history and the champions of the Dragon's Roost for their full Dragon Knighting as redeemed with Dragon standards. You have made it, you have joined us, and you are now officially a Knight of the Realm and a Knight of the Dragon's Roost, one of the greatest places, as you know, on Twitch to be. More exciting times to come, more exciting adventures, and more great fun overall. Welcome indeed, Grim. A true Knight of the Realm and of the Roost. Great to have you back there, Graham. And congratulations. Alrighty, let's get you that lovely VIP badge right away. Dragon Knight hype for Mr. Grimm! Exclamation hype. Glad you could make it. There is true Dragon Knight fully inducted. Gaming Grim Reaper. VIP badge. We have plenty of those to go around. It's lovely to use some more for you today, Mr. Grimm. A very exciting occasion in time for your birthday and is celebrating several months of you joining us for fantastic times. Let's take a quick look here at the channel roles to give you that. Yes. Gaming Grim Reaper, enjoy that lovely new VIP badge. Let me see. Gaming Rim Reaper is how it's actually spelled. Did I get it right? There's only one G. There's so many different versions. Look at these. There's Gaming Grim Reaper, Gaming Rim Reaper. Rim. Why is that so hard? It's really not that hard. Alright, we actually have, yeah, thanks to you now, 14 more slots. Well, there's also the artist one. That's cool. But yeah, now we have 14 more slots, VIPs. You are about our 6th or so VIP. Enjoy the badge, my friend, and welcome to the full heraldry of Dragon Knights, knighted by another knight. Any knight can make another knight, and this time you've been made one of the best knights, a Dragon Knight of the Dragon's Roost. Thank you, Grim, and welcome once again. There it is. Alrighty. Looking good. Let's see here. Something else had gone on ahead, a larger wisp which now and then condensed into nameless approximations of form, and he thought that their progress had not been in a straight line, but rather along the alien curves and spirals of some ethereal vortex which obeyed laws unknown to the physics and mathematics of any conceivable cosmos. Yeah, we left off somewhere around there. Yep, just Gaming Grim Reaper. Yep, we got it. And there's your badge, looking great along with your sub-badge, of course, thanks to Shipleft. Absolutely. Eventually, there had been a hint of vast leaping shadows, of a monstrous half-acoustic pulsing, and of the thin, monotonous piping of an unseen flute. But that was all. Gilman decided he had picked up the last conception from what he had read in the Necronomicon about the mindless city entity, Azathoth, which rules all time and space from a curiously environed black throne at the center of chaos. When the blood was washed away, the wrist wound proved very slight, and Gilman puzzled over the location of the 2 tiny punctures. It occurred to him that there was no blood on the bedspread where he had lain, which was very curious in view of the amount of his skin and cuff. Had he been sleepwalking within his room, and had the rat bitten him as he sat in some chair or paused in some less rational position? Absolutely, Grim. My pleasure. 'Tis my honor, brother. He looked in every corner for brownish drops or stains, but did not find any. He had better, he thought, sprinkle flour within the room as well as outside the door, though after all, no further proof of his sleepwalking was needed. He knew he did walk, and the thing to do now was to stop it. He must ask Frank Elwood for help. This morning the strange pulls from space seemed lessened, though they were replaced by another sensation, even more inexplicable. It was a vague, insistent impulse to fly away from his present situation, but held not a hint of the specific direction in which he wished to fly. As he picked up the strange, spiky image on the table, he thought the older northward pull grew a trifle stronger. But even so, it was wholly overruled by the newer and more bewildered urge. He took the spiky image down to Elwood's room, steeling himself against the winds of the loom fixer which welled up from the ground floor. Elwood was in, thank heaven, and appeared to be stirring about. There was time for a little conversation before leaving for breakfast and college, so Gilman hurriedly poured forth an account of his recent dreams and fears. Sounds good, Grim. His host was very sympathetic and agreed that something ought to be done. He was shocked by his guest's drawn, haggard aspect, and noticed the queer, abnormal-looking sunburn which others had remarked during the past week. There was not much, though, that he could say. He had not seen Gilman on any sleepwalking expedition and had no idea what the curious image could be. He had, though, heard the French-Canadian who lodged just under Gilman talking to Mazurowicz one evening. They were telling each other how badly they dreaded the coming of Walpurgis night, now only a few days off, and were exchanging pitying comments about the poor, doomed young gentleman. Desrochers, the fellow under Gilman's room, had spoken of nocturnal footsteps, both shod and unshod, and of the violent light he saw one night when he had stolen fearfully up to peer through Gilman's keyhole. He had not dared to peer, he told Mazurowicz, after he had glimpsed that light through the cracks around the door. There had been soft talking, too, and as he began to describe it, his voice had sunk to an inaudible whisper. Elwood could not imagine what had set these superstitious creatures gossiping, but suppose their imaginations had been roused by Gilman's late hours and somnolent walking and talking on the one hand, and by the nearness of traditionally feared May Eve on the other hand. That Gilman talked in his sleep was plain, and it was obviously from Desrocher's keyhole listenings that the delusive notion of the violet dreamlight had been abroad. These simple people were quick to imagine that they had seen any odd thing they had heard about. As for a plan of action, Gilman had better move down to Elwood's room and avoid sleeping alone. Elwood would, if awake, rouse him whenever he began to talk or rise in his sleep. Very soon, too, he must see the specialist. Meanwhile, they would take the spiky image around to the various museums and to certain professors, seeking identification and stating that it had been found in a public rubbish can. Also, Dombrowski must attend to the poisoning of those rats in the walls. Braced up by Elwood's companionship, Gilman attended classes that day. Strange urges still tugged at him, but he would sidetrack them with considerable success. During a free period, he shewed the queer image to several professors, all of whom were intensely interested, though none of them could shed any light upon its nature or origin. That night he slept on a couch with Elwood, which Elwood had the landlord bring to the second-story room, and for the first time in weeks was wholly free from disquieting dreams. But the feverishness still hung on, and the whines of the loon fixer were an unnerving influence. During the next few days, Gilman enjoyed an almost perfect immunity from morbid manifestations. He had, Elwood said, showed no tendency to talk or rise in his sleep, and meanwhile the landlord was putting rat poison everywhere. The only disturbing element was the talk among the superstitious foreigners, whose imaginations had become highly excited. Mazurowicz was always trying to make him get a crucifix, and finally forced one upon him, which he had said been blessed by the good Father Iwaniki. Desrochers, too, had something to say. In fact, he insisted that cautious steps had sounded in the now vacant room above him on the first and second night of Gilman's absence from it. Paul Choinsky thought he heard sounds in the halls and the stairs at night, and claimed that his door had been softly tried, while Mrs. Dombrowski vowed she had seen Brown Jenkin for the first time since All Hallows. But such naive reports could mean very little, and and Gilman let the cheap metal crucifix hang idly from a knob on his host's dresser. For 3 days, Gilman and Elwood canvassed the local museums in an effort to identify the strange spiky image, but always without success. In every quarter, however, interest was intense, for the utter alienage of the thing was a tremendous challenge to scientific curiosity. One of the small radiating arms was broken off and subjected to chemical analysis, and the result is still talked about in college circles. Professor Ellery found platinum, iron, and tellurium in the strange alloy, but mixed with these were at least 3 other apparent elements of high atomic weight, which chemistry was absolutely powerless to classify. Not only did they fail to correspond with any unknown element, but they did not even fit the vacant places reserved for probable elements in the periodic systems. The mystery remains unsolved to this day, though the image is on exhibition at the Museum of Miskatonic University. On the morning of April 27th, a fresh rat hole appeared in the room where Gilman was a guest. But Dombrowski tinned it up during the day. The poison was not having much effect, for scratchings and scurryings in the walls were virtually undiminished. Elwood was out late that night, and Gilman waited up for him. He did not wish to go to sleep in a room alone, especially since he thought he had glimpsed in the evening twilight the repellent old woman whose image had become so horribly transferred to his dreams. He wondered who she was, and what had been near her rattling the tin can in a rubbish heap at the mouth of a squalid courtyard. The crone had seemed to notice him and leer evilly at him, though perhaps this was merely his imagination. The next day both youths felt very tired, and knew they would sleep like dogs when night came. In the evening they drowsily discussed the mathematical studies which had so completely and perhaps harmfully engrossed Gilman, and speculated about the linkage with ancient magic and folklore which seemed so darkly probable. They spoke of old Keziah Mason, and Elwood agreed that Gilman had good scientific grounds for thinking she might have stumbled on strange and significant information. The hidden cults to which these witches belonged often guarded and handed down surprising secrets from elder forgotten eons, and it was by no means impossible that Keziah had actually mastered the art of passing through dimensional gates. Tradition emphasizes the uselessness of material barriers in haltings a witch's motions, and who can say what underlies the old tales of broomstick rides through the night. Whether a modern student could ever gain similar powers from mathematical research alone was still to be seen. Success, Gilman added, might lead to dangerous and unthinkable situations, for who could foretell the conditions pervading an adjacent but normally inaccessible dimension? On the other hand, the picturesque possibilities were enormous. Time could not exist in certain belts of space, and by entering and remaining in such a belt, one might preserve one's life and age indefinitely, never suffering organic metabolism or deterioration except for slight amounts incurred during visits to one's own or similar planes. One might, for example, pass into timeless dimension and emerge at some remote period of the Earth's history as young as before. Whether anybody had ever managed to do this, one could hardly conjecture with any degree of authority. Old legends are hazy and ambiguous, and in historic times all attempts at crossing forbidden gaps seems complicated by strange and terrible alliances with beings and messengers from outside. There was the immemorial figure of the deputy, or messenger of hidden and terrible powers, the Black Man of the witch cult, and the Nyarlathotep of the Necronomicon. There was, too, the baffling problem of the lesser messengers, or intermediaries, the quasi-animals and queer hybrids, which legend depicts as witches' familiars. As Gilman the Elwood retired, too sleepy to argue further, they heard Joe Mazurowicz reel into the house half drunk and shuddered at the desperate wildness of his whining prayers. That night Gilman saw the violet light again. In his dream he had heard a scratching and gnawing in the partitions, and thought that someone fumbled clumsily at the latch. Then he saw the old woman and a small, furry thing advancing toward him over the carpeted floor. The beldame's face was alight with inhuman exultation, and the little yellow-toothed morbidity tittered mockingly as it pointed at the heavily sleeping form of Elwood on the other couch across the room. A paralysis of fear stifled all attempts to cry out. As once before, the hideous crone seized Gilman by the shoulders, yanked him out of bed and into empty space. Again the infinitude of the shrieking twilight abysses flashed past him. But in another second he thought he was in a dark, muddy, unknown alley of fetid odors, with the rotting walls of ancient houses towering up on every hand. Ahead was the robed black man he had seen in the peak space in the other dream, while from a lesser distance the old woman was beckoning and grimacing imperiously. Brown Jenkins was rubbing itself with a kind of affectionate playfulness around the ankles of the black man, which the deep mud largely concealed. Shiny. There was a dark, open doorway on the right, to which the black man silently pointed. Into this the grimacing crone started, dragging Gilman after her by his pajama sleeve. There were evil-smelling staircases which creaked ominously, and on which the old woman seemed to radiate a faint violet light, and finally a door leading off a landing. The crone fumbled with the latch and pushed the door open, motioning to Gilman to wait and disappearing inside the black aperture. The youth's oversensitive ears caught a hideous strangled cry, and presently the beldame came out of the room, bearing a small, senseless form, which she thrust at the dreamer as if ordering him to carry it. The sight of this form, and the expression on its face, broke the spell. Still too dazed to cry out, he plunged recklessly down the noisome staircase and into the mud outside, halting only when seized and choked by the waiting black man. As consciousness departed, he heard the faint, shrill tittering of the fanged, rat-like abnormality. On the morning of the 29th, Gilman awakened into a maelstrom of horror. The instant he opened his eyes, he knew something was terribly wrong, for he was back in his old garret room with the slating wall and ceiling, sprawled on the now unmade bed. His throat was aching inexplicably, and as he struggled to a sitting posture, he saw, with growing fright, that his feet and pajama bottoms were brown with caked mud. For the moment, his recollections were hopelessly lazy, but he knew at least that he must have been sleepwalking. Elwood had been lost too deeply in slumber to hear and stop him. On the floor were confused, muddy prints, but oddly enough, they did not extend all the way to the door. The more Gilman looked at them, the more peculiar they seemed, for in addition to those he could recognize as his, there were more smaller, almost round markings, such as the legs of a large chair or table might make, except that most of them tended to be divided into halves. There were also some curious muddy rat tracks leading out of a fresh hole and back into it again. Utter bewilderment and the fear of madness racked Gilman as he staggered to the door and saw that there were no muddy prints outside. The more he remembered of his hideous dream, the more terrified he felt, and it added to his desperation to hear Joe Mazurwitch chanting mournfully 2 floors below. Descending to Elwood's room, he roused his still sleeping host and began telling of how he had found himself, but Elwood could form no idea of what might really have happened, where Gilman could have been, how he got back to his room without making tracks in the hall, and how the muddy, furniture-like prints came to be mixed with his in the garret chamber, where wholly beyond conjecture. Then there were those dark, livid marks on his throat, as if he had tried to strangle himself. He put his hands up to them, but found that they did not even approximately fit. While they were talking, Desrochers dropped in to say that he had heard a terrific clattering overhead in the dark small hours. No, there had been no one on the stairs after midnight, though just before midnight he had heard faint footfalls in the garret and cautiously descending steps he did not like. It was, he added, a very bad time of year for Arkham. The young gentleman had better be sure to wear the crucifix Joe Mazurwitch had given him. Even the daytime was not safe, for after dawn there had been strange sounds in the house, especially a thin, childish wail hastily choked off. Gilman mechanically attended classes that morning, but was wholly unable to fix his mind on his studies. A mood of hideous apprehension and expectancy had seized him, and he seemed to be awaiting the fall of some annihilating blow. At noon he lunched at the university spa, picking up a paper from the next seat as he waited for dessert. But he never ate that dessert, for an item on the paper's first page left him limp, wide-eyed, and able only to pay his check and stagger back to Elwood's room. There had been a strange kidnapping the night before in Orrin's gangway, and the 2-year-old child of a clod-like laundry worker named Anastasia Wolodchko had completely vanished from sight. The mother, it appeared, had feared the event for some time, but the reasons she assigned for her fear were so grotesque that no one took them seriously. She had, she said, seen Brown Jenkin about the place now and then ever since early in March, and knew from its grimaces and titterings that little Ladislas must be marked for sacrifice at the awful Sabbat on Walpurgis night. She had asked her neighbor, Mary Janek, to sleep in the room and to try to protect the child, but Mary had not dared. She could not tell the police, for they never believed such things. Children had been taken that way every year since she could remember, and her friend Pete Stawacki would not help because he wanted the child out of the way anyhow. But what threw Gilman into a cold perspiration was the report of a pair of revelers who had been walking past the mouth of the gangway just after midnight. They admitted they had been drunk, but both vowed they had seen a crazily dressed trio furtively entering the dark passageway. There had been, they said, a huge robed Negro, a little old woman in rags, and a young white man in his nightclothes. The old woman had been dragging the youth, while around the feet of the Negro a tame rat was rubbing and weaving in the brown mud. Gilman sat in a daze all the afternoon, and Elwood, who had meanwhile seen the papers and formed terrible conjectures from them, found him thus when he came home. This time neither could doubt but that something hideously serious was closing in around them. Between the phantasms of nightmare and the realities of the objective world, a monstrous and unthinkable relationship was crystallizing, and only stupendous vigilance could avert still more direful developments. Gilman must see a specialist sooner or later, but not just now, when all the papers were full of this kidnapping business. Just what had really happened was maddeningly obscure, and for a moment both Gilman and Elwood exchanged whispers, theories of the wildest kind. Had Gilman unconsciously succeeded better than he knew in his studies of space and its dimensions? Had he actually slipped outside our sphere to point unguessed and unimaginable? Where, if anywhere, had he been on those nights of demonic alienage? The roaring twilight abysses, the green hillside, the blistering terrace, the pulls from the stars, the ultimate black vortex, the black man, the muddy alley and the stairs, the old witch and the fanged, furry horror, the bubble conjuries and the little polyhedron, the strange sunburn, the wrist wound, the unexplained image, the muddy feet, the throat marks, the tales and fears of the superstitious foreigners. What did all this mean? To what extent could the laws of sanity apply to such a case? There was no sleep for either of them that night, but next day they both cut classes and drowsed. This was April 30th, and with the dusk would come the hellish Sabbath time, which all the foreigners and the superstitious old folk feared. Mazurwich came home at 6 o'clock and said people at the mill were whispering that the Walpurgis revels would be held in the dark ravine beyond Meadow Hill, where the old white stone stands in a place queerly void of all plant life. Some of them had even told the police and advised them to look there for the missing Wolechko child, but they did not believe anything would be done. Joe insisted that the poor young gentleman wear his nickel-chain crucifix, and that Gilman put it on and dropped it inside his shirt to humor the fellow. Late at night the two youths sat drowsing in their chairs, lulled by the rhythmically praying of the loom fixer on the floor below. Gilman listened as he nodded. He preternaturally sharpened hearing seemed to strain for some subtle, dreaded murmur beyond the noises in the ancient house. Unwholesome recollections of things in the Necronomicon and the Black Book welled up, and he found himself swaying to infandious rhythms said to pertain to the blackest ceremonies of the Sabbath, and to have an origin outside the time and space we comprehend. Presently he realized what he was listening for. The hellish chant of the celebrants in the distant Black Valley. How did he know so much about what they expected? How did he know the time when Nahab and her acolyte were due to bear the brimming bowl which would follow the black cock and the black goat? He saw that Elwood had dropped asleep and tried to call out and waken him. Something, however, closed his throat. He was not his own master. Had he signed the black man's book after all? Then his fevered, abnormal hearing caught the distant, wind-borne notes. Over mills of hill and field and alley they came, but he recognized them nonetheless. The fires must be lit, and the dancers must be starting in. How could he keep himself from going? What was it that he had enmeshed him? Mathematics, folklore, the house, old Keziah, Brown Jinkin, and now he saw that there was a fresh rat hole in the wall near his couch. Above the distant chanting and the near praying of Joe Mazurwich came another sound, a stealthy, determined scratching in the partitions. He hoped the electric lights would not go out. Then he saw the fanged, bearded little face in the rat hole, the accursed little face which he at last realized bore such a shocking, mocking resemblance to old Keziah's, and heard the faint fumbling at the door. The screaming twilight abysses flashed before him, and he felt himself helpless in the formless grasp of the iridescent bubble conjuries. Ahead raced the small kaleidoscopic polyhedron, and all through the churning void there was a heightening and acceleration of the vague tonal pattern which seemed to foreshadow some unutterable and unendurable climax. He seemed to know what was coming, the monstrous burst of Walpurgis rhythm in whose cosmic timbre would be concentrated all the primal ultimate space-time seethings which lie behind the massed spheres of matter, and sometimes break forth in measured reverberations that penetrate faintly to every layer of entity and give hideous significance throughout the worlds to certain dreaded periods. But all this vanished in a second. He was again in the cramped, violet-litten, peaked space with the slanting floor, the low cases of ancient books, the bench and the table, the queer objects, and the triangular gulf at one side. On the table lay a small white figure, an infant boy, unclothed and unconscious, while on the other side stood the monstrous, leering old woman with a gleaming, grotesque, hafted knife in her right hand and a queerly proportioned pale metal bowl covered with curiously chased designs and having delicate lateral handles in her left. She was intoning some croaking ritual in a language which Gilmid could not understand, but which seemed like something quartedly quoted in the Necronomicon. As the scene grew clear, he saw the ancient crone bend forward and extend the empty bowl across the table, and unable to control his own motions, he reached far toward and took it in both hands, noticing as he did so its comparative lightness. At the same moment, the disgusting form of Brown Jinkin scrambled up over the brink of the triangular black gulf on his left. The crone now motioned him to hold the bowl in a certain position, while she raised the huge, grotesque knife above the small white victim as high as her right hand could reach. The fanged, furry thing began tittering a continuation of the unknown ritual, while the witch croaked loathsome responses. Gilman felt a gnawing, poignant abhorrence shoot through his mental and emotional paralysis, and the light metal bowl shook in his grasp. A second later, the downward motion of the knife broke the spell completely, and he dropped the bowl with a resounding bell-like clangor, while his hands darted out frantically to stop the monstrous deed. In an instant, he had edged up the slanting floor around the end of the table and wrenched the knife from the old woman's claws, sending it clattering over the brink of the narrow, triangular gulf. In another instant, however, matters were reversed, for those murderous claws had locked themselves tightly around his own throat, while the wrinkled face was twisted with insane fury. He felt the chain of the cheap crucifix grinding into his neck, and in his peril wondered how the sight of the object itself would affect the evil creature. Her strength was altogether superhuman, but as she continued her choking, he reached feebly in his shirt and drew out the metal symbol, snapping the chain and pulling it free. At sight of the device, the witch seemed struck with panic, and her grip relaxed long enough to give Gilliman a chance to break it entirely. He pulled the steel-like claws from his neck and would have dragged the beldame over the edge of the gulf had not the claws received a fresh access of strength and closed in again. This time he resolved to reply in kind, and his own hands reached out for the creature's throat. Before she saw what he was doing, Before she saw what he was doing, he had the chain of the crucifix twisted about her neck, and a moment later he had tightened it enough to cut off her breath. During her last struggle, he felt something bite at his ankle, and saw that Brown Jinkid had come to her aid. With one savage kick, he sent the morbidity over the edge of the gulf and heard it whimper on some level far below. Whether he had killed the ancient crone, he did not know, but he let her rest on the floor where she had fallen. Then, as he turned away, he saw on the table a sight which nearly snapped the last thread of his reason. Brown Jinkin, tough of sinew and with 4 tiny hands of demonic dexterity, had been busy while the witch was throttling him, and his efforts had been in vain. What he had prevented the knife from doing to the victim's chest, the yellow fangs of the furry blasphemy had done to her wrist, and the bowl so lately on the floor stood full beside the small, lifeless body. In his dream delirium, Gilman heard the hellish, alien-rhythmed chant of the Sabbath coming from an infinite distance, and knew the black man must be there. Confused memories mixed themselves with his mathematics, and he believed his subconscious mind held the angles which he needed to guide him back to the normal world. Alone and unaided for the first time, he felt sure he was in the immemorially sealed loft above his own room, but whether he could ever escape through the slanting floor or the long sloped egress he doubted greatly. Besides, would not an escape from a dream loft bring him merely into a dream house, an abnormal projection of the actual place he sought? He was wholly bewildered as to the relation betwixt dream and reality in all his experiences. The passage through the vague abysses would be frightful, for the Walpurgis rhythm would be vibrating, and at last he would have to hear that hitherto veiled cosmic pulsing which he so mortally dreaded. Even now, he could detect a low, monstrous shaking whose tempo he suspected all too well. At Sabbath time, it always mounted and reached through to the worlds to summon the initiate to nameless rites. Half the chants of the Sabbat were patterned on the faintly overhead pulsing, which no earthly ear could endure in its unveiled spatial fullness. How could he be sure he would not land on that green-lit hillside of a far planet, on the tessellated terrace above the city of tentacled monsters somewhere beyond the galaxy, or in the spiral black vortices of that ultimate void of chaos wherein reigns the mindless demon sultan Azathoth? Just before he made the plunge, the violet light went out and left him in utter blackness. The witch old Keziah Nahab, that must have meant her death, and mixed with the distant chant of the Sabbath and the whimpers of Brown Jinkin in the gulf below, he thought he heard another and wilder whine from unknown depths. Joe Mazurwich, the prayers against the crawling chaos now turning to an inexplicably triumphant shriek, worlds of sardonic actuality impinging on vortices of febrile dream. La Shub Nigurath, the goat with 1,000 young. They found Gilman on the floor of his queerly angled old garret room long before dawn, for the terrible cry had brought Desrochers and Choinsky and Dombrowski and Mazurwich at once, and had even wakened the soundly sleeping Elwood in his chair. He was alive, and with open, staring eyes, but seemed largely unconscious. On his throat were the marks of murderous hands, and on his left ankle were a distressing rat bite. His clothing was badly rumpled, and Joe's crucifix was missing. Elwood trembled, afraid even to speculate on what new form his friend's sleepwalking had taken. Mazarwich seemed half-dazed because of a sign he said he had in response to his prayers, and he crossed himself frantically when the squealing and whimpering of a rat sounded from beyond the slanting partition. When the dreamer who settled on his couch in Elwood's room, they sent for Dr. Malkowski, a local practitioner who would repeat no tales where they might prove embarrassing, and he gave Gilman 2 hypodermic injections which caused him to relax in something like natural drowsiness. During the day, the patient regained consciousness at times and whispered his newest dream disjointedly to Elwood. It was a painful process, and at its very start brought out a fresh and disconcerting fact. Gilman, whose ears had so lately possessed an abnormal sensitiveness, was now stone deaf. Dr. Malkowski, summoned again in haste, told Elwood that both eardrums were ruptured, as if by the impact of some stupendous sound intense beyond all human conception or endurance. How such a sound could have been heard in the last few hours without arousing all the Miskatonic Valley was more than the honest physician could say. Elwood wrote his part of the colloquy on paper, so that a fairly easy communication was maintained. Neither knew what to make of the whole chaotic business, and decided it would be better if they thought as little as possible about it. Both, though, agreed that they must leave this ancient and accursed house as soon as it could be arranged. Evening papers spoke of a police raid on some curious revelers in a ravine beyond Meadow Hill just before dawn, and mentioned that the white stone there was an object of age-long superstitious regard. Nobody had been caught, but among the scattering fugitives had been glimpsed a huge negro. In another column it was stated that no trace of the missing child Ladislas Woljeko had been found. The crowning horror came that very night. Elwood will never forget it, and was forced to stay out of college the rest of the term because of the resulting nervous breakdown. He had thought he heard rats in the partitions all the evening, but paid little attention to them. Then, along after both he and the Gilman had retired, the atrocious shrieking began. Elwood jumped up, turned on the lights, and rushed over to his guest's couch. The occupant was emitting sounds of veritably inhuman nature, as if racked by some torment beyond description. He was writhing under the bedclothes, and a great red stain was beginning to appear on the blankets. Elwood scarcely dared to touch him, but gradually the screaming and writhing subsided. By this time, Dombrowski, Choinsky, Disrochers, Mazurwich, and the top-floor lodger were all crowding into the doorway. And the landlord had sent his wife back to telephone for Dr. Malkowski. Everybody shrieked when a large rat-like form suddenly jumped out from beneath the ensanguinated bedclothes and scuttled across the floor to a fresh, open hole close by. When the doctor arrived and began to pull down those frightful covers, Walter Gilman was dead. It would be barbarous to do more than suggest what had killed Gilman. There had been virtually a tunnel through his body. Something had eaten his heart out. Domborski, frantic at the failure of his constant rat-poisoning efforts, cast aside all thought of his lease, and within a week had moved with all his older lodgers to a dingy but less ancient house in Walnut Street. The worst thing for a while was keeping Joe Muscurwiz quiet, for the brooding loom fixture would never stay sober, and was constantly whining and muttering about spectral and terrible things. It seems that on the last hideous night, Joe had stooped to look at the crimson rat tracks which led from Gilman's couch to the nearby hole. On the carpet, they were very indistinct, but a piece of open flooring intervened between the carpet's edge and the baseboard. There, Mazurwich had found something monstrous, or thought he had, for no one else could quite agree with him despite the undeniable queerness of the prints. The tracks of the flooring were certainly vastly unlike the average prints of a rat, but even Choinsky and Deschroners would not admit that they were like the prints of 4 tiny human hands. Hey Marsh, good to see you. And yeah, pretty good so far. About 2.5 hours into the Dreams and the Witch House. Pretty interesting. Good to see you, Mr. Red, Crown, Dragonite Marsh. We just knighted Gaming Grim Reaper. Excited for that as well, last hour. And we're waiting his return. We also had Elsa and Alucard in the chat so far. Enjoying some fun times. Interesting story here. We're going to get to some good Hunt, Diablo, Dead by Daylight, and Call of Cthulhu all tonight as well. How about you, Marsh? Saw you were enjoying some good stuff last night. Was able to take a glimpse at least. Good schedule. 90 degrees here today, 92. We'll be back to the watering tomorrow as well, Marsh. So we'll look forward to another amazing Wi-Fi stream for that. I believe they have fiber though, yeah, San Diego broadband. It really depends on the geographic location, but yeah, 30 times better internet than me. I hope someday they'll let me take my computer there or something and stream for like a week solid. That would be fun. Yep, busy and fun day ahead in the Roost. Getting some good readings, some good music, some good exciting adventures. And Marsh, we did remove our follower bots. You will now see our follower list. Instead of that 1,400 from over 800 robos, we are now up to our appropriate 547 Dragon Knights, so much more befitting. And that Siri bot did pop in the chat first thing today, so that's looking good as well. Hot here as well, yep, can't imagine. Good time for the watering hole, and cheers with our fellow glasses. Back to our birthday in December, if not before. Marsh, definitely let you know when the plans for that are in case you're free. We're gonna get a good more stream avatars soon, but in the meantime, enjoy some free points. Yep, we clean that all up, and that is good moving forward. Now with the Siri bot officially in chat, I think we'll prevent any further ones, right? So that's great. But yeah, I did use that Commander Root website to remove the ones that are basically like any that were identified as robots. It could basically tell the ones that were robots, so feeling pretty good. We didn't lose too many human followers, mostly just the robots, so that is great. Okay, let's see what we had for this interesting story. We're coming to the last quarter of it, pretty much. We also did a few fun voice mod effects for
Fun times marshmallow font.
a few fun examples there. And the new cheer for 11, as well as the new LOL. I think you can do that anytime. LOL in the chat. It might be champion only, but yeah, learning about that here and there. Sirbat will prevent like 90% of those accounts. Cool. Commander Root is great for bulk removals. Yep, that's what we needed. I looked that up and found it there, so very exciting, Mr. Marsh. What else are you up today? This great Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. Any 4th of July plans coming up soon? It'll be interesting. We have Grimm's birthday, July 1st. So we'll try to do something for him to celebrate, him being our newest Knighted Dragon.
Then we have 4th of July.
What have we got here? Something's been turned on. Marshmallow has activated the ghost effect. Let's see back where we were. Health officials trace the smell to the closed spaces above the bedside, and Eastern Garrett Lehman agreed that the number of dead rats must be enormous. They decided, however, that it was not worth their while to heal up the disinfectant. The long-sealed spaces for the fitter would soon be over, and the locality was not the one which discouraged fastidious Strandhards. Good one there for the ghost voice. Mars, thank you for our first voice activation in several months. That'll put you on the number 3 spot on the leaderboard for bits, surpassing Moog for the start of June with 100. So that also includes your leaderboard there, and the other recent single bit cheers you did for us recently. Very fun there. Thank you, Marsh. Hope the ghost voice was appropriate there for that little passage there. We'll keep it up and see where I left off. I'm trying to find exactly where we are. Just working today. Not much else planned for the rest of the week. Cool. Nice and free schedule then. Some good real estate fun. I was thinking of that recently as well for property places and different internet as well too. That was fun. Ghost voice. That was very fitting for our ghost story, our witch story. So good choice there, Marsh. Continue to add some new ones. Out of the robot one today. I'm trying to make it a good even bit. I think you can add pretty much infinite amount to the list there. So the more we get more people using them, the more we'll keep adding. And we also have custom voices. Can make my own at some point maybe. We'll see about that. I played with it a little bit so far, but it's tricky. All right, let's see here, Marsh. The house was never retented again. As soon as Dabrowski left and the pall of its final desolation began to descend, for people shunned in both on account, and behold, reputation, new fetid odor.
Stay a while and listen.
Perhaps the ex-landlord's rat poison had worked after all, for not long after this departure, the place became a neighborhood nuisance. I think we're somewhere around there, yeah. All right. Gilman's dreams and their attendant circumstances have never been explained. Elwood, whose thoughts on the entire episode and sometimes almost maddening, came back to college the next autumn and graduated in the following June. He found the spectral gossip of the town much diminished, and it is indeed a fact that, notwithstanding certain reports of a ghostly tittering in the desert house which lasted almost as long as that edifice itself. No fresh appearance either of old Keziah or of Brown Jenkin have been muttered of since Gilman's death. Yep, lovely to see you there, Marsh. Sorry I couldn't tune in too much last night there for yours, but I was playing with other fellow streamer Dookie as well. He was celebrating his Prestige 100 in Hunt, so he had a big raid and such too. I was trying to manage that with my phone and other chats and my chat, of course, so it's hard to tune as many streams as I want. I did see a good Witcher stream last night, though. Portuguese woman living in Denmark. It was fun to see her playing some Witcher. She is doing her second playthrough on Death March, so I was checking out a Witcher fun there last night, hanging out there a bit in the after hours. I guess you had gone to bed by then, probably. It's pretty late. Mistaken about the audio effects causing the volume to be louder. I have Frankenphase on my browser, so I think that was the affecting the volume, so apologize if I made you think it was on your end. Oh, what is that app? Yeah, tell me about that. Interesting. So, yeah, some of them are just different, too, the different effects, so... I'm not too sure. Yeah, Frankenphase. I feel like you've mentioned that before. I'm not entirely sure what that is. Frankenstein and Frankenphase and frankincense. That's funny. But, yeah, I mean, some of them work better than others. Some of them are more clear than others. Others are more kind of just for the fun of it, kind of more sporadic and random. But, yeah, most of them are pretty good. VoiceMod and VoiceMod Pro, we have the whole list now, so we'll just keep adding more and more. And they have the Spellcaster. That's like the most recent one they just added in general, so that's a good one. Applies an audio compressor, so it increases the volume of streams. It also organizes emotes better, kind of like better Twitch TV. Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Of course, he heard about the matter afterward and suffered untold torments of black and bewildered speculation. But even that was not as bad as actual nearness and several possible sights would have been. There we go. Gotcha. Cool. In March 1931, a gale wrecked the roof and great chimney of the vacant witch house, so that a chaos of crumbling bricks, blackened moss-grown shingles, and rotting planks and timbers crashed down into the loft and broke through the floor beneath. See, actually on their voice mod, we'll maybe adjust where that little voice mod alert is, but thankfully we saw it there and it worked just fine. Yeah, I'll move it a little bit to the left here, that'll be better. But yeah, we saw that you activated the ghost one, that was fun. It's weird, it like cascades over a little to the left, so continue to adjust that throughout, but fun time there. Hope the Ghost Spectral Phantom one was a fun debut for you, Marsh, your first time using it. Very exciting. So did you use Curious About Me section or widgets top of chat? Which specific source did you activate it on? Because I'm trying to see which one is easier for people to recognize and access. It's interesting. In March 1931, a gale wrecked the roof and great chimney off the vacant witch house, so that a chaos of crumbling bricks, blackened, moss-grown shingles, and rotting planks and timbers crashed down into the loft and broke through the floor beneath. Lovely stuff there, my friend. You found an About Me section. Yeah, it seems to be the easiest place. I think there's some widgets top of chat, like you see those, like just your crowd control. You see widgets here and there, but About Me does seem to be the main place to find it, yeah. Alright, good stuff, Marsh. The whole attic story was choked with debris from above, but no one took the trouble to touch the mess before the inevitable raising of the decrepit structure. That ultimate step came in the following December, and it was when Gilman's old room was cleared out by reluctant, apprehensive workmen that the gossip began. Or the panel down in that section. I don't see any widgets on chat. Okay, so there's a panel down, yeah, About Me. Huh. How can I add the widgets in chat then? Because you do see some widgets in chat, don't you? None at all then? Huh. Interesting. I used to have some like for recent follow or something. Now that I have the leaderboard, voice mod, and emote showcase, Maybe those aren't as easily accessible as I thought. We'll have to look into those settings later, because we do want easy access, at least for voice mod. Now that we have the pro version, of course. Got the lifetime version. It was actually barely any more expensive than the 1-year version, so that was definitely the way to go. Yep. Among the rubbish which had been crashed through the ancient slanting ceiling were several things which made the workmen pause and call in the police. When you're saying widgets, are you talking about stuff over your video player? I mean in the chat too, though. Like there's a little side thing on the chat. Yeah, like I know your crowd control is in the video player, but I think there's some like in chat too, isn't there? Like in the chat screen. See the panels below the video player, that's how I access the voice mod. Okay, so there's one on the video player, the panels, and then there's About Me section below too, or is there 2 places, or are you just talking about the one About Me? Sorry, I'm just trying to envision it. It's hard for me to tell myself. Okay, gotcha. I've got to go help for some things. We'll finish off this last paragraph. Let's see how long we have, actually. We've made a good dent in this story for sure, but let's see. We left off here. Oh, we're at the end. Well, that's easy. Okay. Didn't realize it was that close. All right, for a final bit here of the dreams in the witch house. Let's finish it off. Our final few paragraphs here. Later, the police in turn called in the coroner and several professors from the university. There were bones, badly crushed and splintered, but clearly recognizable as human, which manifested modern-day conflicted puzzlingly with the remote period at which their only possible lurking place, the low, slant-floored loft overhead, had supposedly been sealed from all human access. The coroner's physician decided that some belonged to a small child, while certain others, found mixed with shreds of rotten brownish cloth, belonged to a rather undersized, bent female of advanced years. Careful sifting of debris also disclosed many tiny bones of rats caught in the collapses, as well as older rat bones gnawed by small fangs in a fashion now and then highly productive of controversy and reflection. Only see the panel. I do not see the voice mod anywhere else, but that could just because I'm not seeing it. I think you're right then, Marsh. You would know a good amount about that. So yeah, maybe we can figure out how to add it in a second place. But at least we have the main one for now, and it's fully functional, so that's something. Other objects found included the mingled fragments of many books and papers, together with a yellowish dust left from the total disintegration of still older books and papers. All without exception appeared to deal with black magic in its most advanced and horrible forms, and the evidently recent date of certain items is still a mystery as unsolved as that of the modern human bones. An even greater mystery is that the absolute homogeneity of the crabbed, archaic writing found on a wide range of papers, whose conditions and watermarks suggest age differences of at least 150 to 200 years. To some, though, the greatest mysteries of all is the variety of utterly inexplicable objects, objects whose shapes, materials, types of workmanship, and purposes baffle all conjecture, found scattered amidst the wreckage in evidently diverse states of injury. One of these things, while excited several Miskatonic professors profoundly, is a badly damaged monstrosity plainly resembling the strange image which Gilman gave to the college museum, save that it is larger, wrought of some peculiar bluish stone instead of metal, and possessed of a singularly angled pedestal with undecipherable hieroglyphics. Check out your extensions page and settings and see if you can set it to an overlay. I don't know if that will remove it as a panel, though. The panel works fine, though, so no need to worry about it too much. Great, yeah, we'll take a look at the settings here for tonight. Sounds good. Okay, possessed of a singular angled pedestal with undecipherable hieroglyphics. Here we are at the end. Archaeologists and anthropologists are still trying to explain the bizarre designs chased on a crushed bowl of light metal whose inner side bore ominous brownish stains when found. Foreigners and credulous grandmothers are equally garrulous about the modern nickel crucifix with broken chain mixed in the rubbish and shiveringly identified by Joe Mazurowicz as that which had been given poor Gilman many years before. Some believe this crucifix was dragged up to the besealed loft by rats, while others think it must have been on the floor in some corner of Gilman's old room all the time. Still others, including Joe himself, gave theories too wild and fantastic for sober credence. When the slanting wall of Gilman's room was torn out, the once sealed triangular shape between that partition and the house's north wall was found to contain much less structural debris, even in proportion to its size, than the room itself, though it had a ghastly layer of older materials which paralyzed the wreckers with horror. In brief, the floor was a veritable ossuary of the stones of small children, some fairly modern, but others extending back in infinite gradations to a period so remote that crumbling was almost complete. On this deep, bony layer rested a knife of great size, obvious antiquity and grotesque ornate, an exotic design above which the debris was piled. In the midst of this debris, wedged between a fallen plank and a cluster of cemented bricks from the ruined chimney, was an object destined to cause more bafflement, veiled fright, and openly superstitious talk in Arkham than anything else discovered in the haunted and accursed buildings. This object was the partly crushed skeleton of a huge, diseased rat, whose abnormalities of form are still a topic of debate and source of singular reticence among the members of Miskatonic's Department of Comparative Anatomy. Very little concerning the skeleton had leaked out, but the workmen who found it whisper in shocked tones about the long, brownish hairs with which it was associated. The bones of the tiny paws, it is rumored, imply prehensile characteristics more typical of a diminutive monkey than of a rat, while the small skull with its savage yellow fangs is of the utmost anomalousness, appearing from certain angles like a miniature, monstrously degraded parody of a human skull. The workmen crossed themselves in fright when they came upon this blasphemy, but later burned candles of gratitude in St. Stanislaus Church because of the shrill, ghostly tittering they felt they would never hear again. Alrighty then, I hope you guys enjoyed The Dreams in the Witch House. H.P. Lovecraft, indeed a good 3-hour story. We have finished. Alright, pretty interesting there. Pretty fun. We had a good 3-hour story. That will save a lot of time for now, but we will come back for some good time. We'll get some highlights from Hunt last night. We'll get some Call of Cthulhu. We'll get some Diablo. We'll get some Dead by Daylight, and we'll get some more Hunt. So we'll get as much as we can for that. Got to take a shower, get some other stuff. Thank you to Marsh, Elsa, Alucard, Grim for coming to chat here today. I will see you guys tonight as we keep up the good fun. Have a lovely evening there, Marsh. Thanks for helping me about there for the widgets and such. Thanks for the help. And we'll be picking it up soon. So until then, guys, have a lovely day. Hope you enjoy the story to get us started today. And we'll be back shortly for some good adventures. I'll see you then. It will be lovely. And we'll pick it on up. Alrighty then. We will raid a old friend I haven't seen in a long time. Hasn't been in chat in over a year, but he used to chat here and there, so we'll raid him for now. I'll see you tonight. Thank you, Martian friends. Alucard, Grim, congratulations on the knighting again, Grim. Thank you, Elsa. Thank you, Alucard. I'll see you guys shortly tonight, and it will be very, very lovely. It's not letting me type it in. Oh, he has a weird name, that's why. Is it working? Yeah. Alright, see you tonight, guys. Gonna be great. Thank you, everyone, for enjoying the story. Thank you for the 4 viewers, the 5 viewers. Man, that's a lot of lurkers. Thanks, 6 lurkers. Where are you guys all coming from? Jeez. Well, I hope you enjoyed wherever you came from. That is a lot of lurkers. Thank you, guys. We'll be back to it tonight. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in a bit tonight. I don't know why there's so many people here I did not even know about, but I appreciate you nonetheless. And hope you enjoyed. We'll be back to it here very shortly. Gonna go help out, take a shower. I'll see you then, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the big dragon raid. Enjoy those extra dragon standards. We'll pick it up here. A great time tonight. Until then, guys, thanks for the lurking, and thanks for enjoying. I'll see you soon. Tuning in. Thanks for the big dragon raid. Enjoy those extra dragon standards. We'll pick it up here. A great time tonight. Until then, guys, thanks for the lurking, and thanks for enjoying. I'll see you soon. Tuning in. Thanks for the big dragon raid. Enjoy those extra dragon standards. We'll pick it up here. A great time tonight. Until then, guys, thanks for the lurking, and thanks for enjoying. I'll see you soon.
You're good, bro. Hey, what's up, Ace? I haven't heard from you in a long time. Thank you. Welcome, Raiders. We're playing this game that I have no idea what it is. Yeah, I've been alright, man. What about you? I haven't heard from you in a long time. I'm doing alright. I'm trying this game out. I've been on a sci-fi kick lately, and I've been addicted to sci-fi games, but nothing quite fits the bill.